let's take a look at our very first attempt at writing a proof. So the way that proofs are set up is you're going to be given a diagram. So here's our diagram, and take a look at it. They've given us some information. I can see that there's some tick marks and some things that match up, and there's some tick marks we'll probably be able to add as well. Proofs are going to have givens to us, things that they just come right out and say are true, and so we don't have to prove it. They just tell us those statements are true. So I'm noting those, and then they'll also give you something that you're trying to prove, and notice that that is always going to be where we want to end up. So we have to try to kind of get there. In this case, we're trying to prove that two triangles are congruent to each other. Well, at this point, we only have one way to do it, and that's to prove that all 6 parts, the 3 pairs of angles and the 3 pair of sides, are congruent. So I kind of have a checklist along the side. There are 6 boxes we have to check off before we can chalk off that very final box. So again, this is sort of our first attempt at writing a proof, so let's see how this goes. So the first thing they're telling us is that segment AD is congruent to segment CB. I need to know why, though. Proof writing, we can't just make statements, but we have to say why we know this. Well, a good proof always starts out with what we're given, and so I can see that up here. That was given to me, that AD and CB were congruent. So I'm going to say I know that because, well, it was given to me. I don't need to prove anything else. They told me that was true. And I can see that I also have those tick marks in my diagram. They wrote those in for us, although if they didn't, I'd want to add those right away. Next up, they say that segment DC is congruent to segment AB or BA. Once again, that was given to me. Okay. This is a very simple proof, by the way. If you think this one's easy, that's good. It should be easy. They will get much more complicated as we go and take a look at some shortcuts. So I've got 2 sides figured out. Let's check those boxes off. Next up, they tell me that segment AC is congruent to segment AC. Well, that was not given to me. It's not in the list of given. So going and taking a look at my diagram, well, AC and AC, well, like we talked about in the previous video, that side is shared between the 2 triangles. So we talked about it's okay to add your own tick mark when they share a side. So I'm going to add that triple tick mark in there. Something is obviously congruent to itself. If you recall, the reason we said we're allowed to do that is because of something called the reflexive property. So every time you add a tick mark, you have to give me a reason why you're adding it. You can't just say I added it because I wanted to or because it helped me solve the proof. You need a legitimate reason to do it, and this is the reflexive property. Well, let's check that box off. There's my 3 sides. I'm halfway there. Let's go ahead and see what we can do with angles. Notice the angles have been labeled with 3 letters this time, and if you need help seeing where they are, trace it out. So for example, angle ACD is right there. We can't just say angle C because there's too many angles in the diagram at that location. If I just did angle C, it would not be unclear. So sometimes it takes 3 letters. But anyways, back to our proof. The reason that I know segment ACD and CBA are congruent is because, well, once again, that was given to me. So I'll add given. Usually we would start a proof writing all our givens, but in this case I separated it so that our angles and our sides were grouped together. This pair of angles was also given to us in the diagram, and there's tick marks already given to me in the picture as well, otherwise I would add those in. So I'm 5/6 of the way there. I just have one more thing I need to prove before I can chalk off that final box. And in this case, it's, well, the last 2 angles, angle ADC, which are these unmarked angles. This one out here, I'm just going to do that for right now so you can see where I'm looking, and then this one over here. Well, I added the tick marks in, which would be great, but I need a reason why. I can't just do it because I want to. So in this case, 2 of the angles were already given to me, this angle and the double angle. Well, since we know that the 3 angles in a triangle add up to 180 degrees, whatever these 2 angles are going to determine what this 3rd angle has to be. Like, there's not going to be a possibility to it. So I think what we used in class, we said, well, suppose that those 2 angles add up to 100 degrees. That means this one has to be 80 degrees. Like, there's no way around it. Well, since these 2 angles would be the same, also 100, this would also have to be 80, for example. So all this is to say that if we know 2 angles are congruent, I know that 3rd angle has to match up. The book calls this, or in class we call this, the 3rd angle theorem, which if you want to call it that, that's fine. I prefer if-then statements, though. They seem to make more sense than just stating these weird theorems. So what I would say is something like, if 2 angles in a triangle are already congruent, then there's our if-then statement. Then the 3rd angle, or the 3rd pair of angles, then the 3rd angle, I'll just say, is also congruent. So I abbreviated a little bit in my proof, but I would word it like that. If two angles are congruent, then the third one has to be congruent as well. And so I can check off that box right there. So finally, I've arrived at the end of my proof. I've proved that all 6 parts are congruent. So I'm going to go ahead and X off that big final box. I can now say that for sure those 2 triangles are congruent to each other. However, I still need a reason for that. And at this point, the only reason we have is because all 6 parts, the 3 pairs of sides and the 3 pair of angles, are congruent to each other. So there's our very first proof.